Hi, my name is Artis. I was 7 months pregnant when my husband told me I was too loud at night and moved me to sleep in the garage. 2 weeks later, I was in labor, screaming at the top of the stairs, and he shoved me. No ambulance call, no help, just slammed the door. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing I had been paying for everything. His life, his business, even his betrayals, with my own money for years. Why did I let it get that far? Why did no one see what was happening behind our pretty front door? And why, even now, does part of me still feel guilty for fighting back? Stay with me. I want to tell you what happened next. It was still dark when I rolled out of bed, careful not to wake Derek. The clock read 5:42 a.m., a time that used to feel punishing, now just part of the rhythm. I padded quietly into the kitchen, flipping on the coffee maker. It clicked like a metronome, measuring the silence between us. I moved through the motions. Scrambled eggs, toast, 1 cup of black coffee for him, none for me. I'd given it up after the pregnancy. I transferred my paycheck to our joint account while the eggs cooled. I didn't need to check the balance to know it would be tight. Again. I watched the confirmation screen blink. Just like that, my work became our survival. But only one of us had to show up each morning. Derek came downstairs 40 minutes later, barefoot, yawning. "You didn't make bacon?" "I used the last pack Sunday," I said. He scratched his neck and shrugged. "You could have picked some up yesterday. You were already at the store." I didn't answer. He took his coffee and shuffled to the living room, flipping on the TV. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands resting on the counter, staring at nothing in particular. The sun hadn't fully risen, but already I felt behind. Later that day, I ignored another group text from my college friends. I used to be the one organizing get-togethers. Now, I was the ghost who sent polite thumbs-up emojis instead of answers. Derek called them distractions. "They're not married," he'd say. "They don't get what it's like. They just want to feel better about their own messes." At first, I believed him, that they were jealous, that their advice came from a place of bitterness, not concern. But I wasn't sure anymore. Hadn't been for a while. I'd been offered a promotion last quarter, team lead. Bigger projects, more responsibility, better pay. When I mentioned it, Derek made a face like I'd offered him poison. "So what? You'll come home even later? Spend more time with your boss than your husband?" I turned it down. Told HR the timing wasn't right, that I was focusing on my family. I convinced myself I was being selfless. But that word, family, started to sound hollow in my mouth. One night after dinner, he rested his hand on my belly and said, "There's our little tax deduction." He laughed like it was charming. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. We used to dream about names, nursery themes, how he'd coach Little League. Now we joked about deductions and daycare costs. I checked our bank app before bed. Another withdrawal, $600 labeled consulting tools. I didn't ask. I knew what he'd say. Something vague, condescending. He'd call me paranoid or insecure. I started keeping notes in my phone instead. Not confrontations, just facts. I began with, "Check account every other day." The night turned cold, and I lay awake longer than I meant to. I rolled over to face him. "Can we do something Friday?" I asked softly. "Like dinner? Just us?" He didn't even open his eyes. "Why are you always so needy?" I didn't answer. I turned to the other side, hand on my stomach, feeling the baby's faint kicks like a Morse code only I could read. "We're okay," I whispered. "Even if it's just us, we're okay." He said I was needy, but I was just trying to be seen. That Friday night, I made roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes. The scent filled the kitchen, warm and nostalgic, like something out of a holiday memory. I set the table for 2. Plates aligned, silverware neat, cloth napkins folded just so. Derek had texted earlier saying he'd be home by 7. At 7:23, I heard the door open and his footsteps, upstairs, not toward the kitchen. "You coming down?" I called gently, unsure why I even bothered. No, I've got some calls to finish. Just eat without me, he yelled back. The candles I'd lit flickered for no one. I sat and ate alone, watching my own reflection in the window across from me. The food tasted fine, but the silence was bitter. We used to talk over meals, laugh about silly things from our day. Now, the only conversation was with my own doubt. My phone buzzed beside my plate. "Miss you, girl. You okay?" It was from Lena, a friend I hadn't seen since before the pregnancy. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, "I'm okay, just..." and then stopped. Derek's voice echoed in my head. "They just want gossip. Don't feed into it." I deleted the draft, locked the screen, and flipped the phone over. Later that week, I walked past Derek in the hallway. He brushed by me, muttering, "You're lucky I even put up with your moods." I turned to say something, anything, but the words stuck. He always said things like that with a smirk, like it was some kind of charm. But it didn't feel like teasing anymore. It felt like something else, like contempt dressed in humor. Bills had been stacking up, so I checked our joint account. Again. 2 large transfers, one marked Future BizDev, the other with no label at all. I stared at them, calculating how much was left. Not enough for rent and prenatal vitamins. Not enough for peace of mind. I scribbled the amounts on a notepad I kept hidden in a drawer. My own paper trail. He walked by, saw the screen, and said, "Don't worry, it's for the future. You want a nice house, right?" He said, "You," like it was all mine, like the weight of his ambition rested solely on my shoulders. Sunday morning, I heard him getting dressed. Slacks, button-down, a spritz of cologne. "You going somewhere?" I asked from the bed. "Church," he said, grabbing his keys. "You should rest." "You sure they won't wonder why I haven't been there in weeks?" "They'll understand. Besides, it's not like you have the energy for it," he said without looking back. He was right. I didn't have the energy, but not because of the pregnancy, because of the distance. Later, I got a message from Mary, one of the older ladies at church. "Miss seeing you. Hope you're doing okay, sweetheart," I replied. "Just been tired lately." It wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the truth either. Midweek, I received an invitation, my sister's baby shower. It was out of town, just a couple of hours' drive. She included a handwritten note. "Would mean so much if you came." I hadn't seen her since her own wedding, mostly because Derek always had a reason to skip family things. When I brought it up that night, Derek shook his head. "You think it's smart to travel that far while pregnant? Really? What if something happens?" "I'd be careful." "It's not a good look," he cut in. "Besides, they're probably just doing it for attention." I canceled. Texted my sister an excuse about doctor's appointments. She sent back a short reply. "Okay, take care." I didn't go. I stayed in the house that weekend, folding laundry and watching reruns of a show I used to love but no longer felt connected to. The baby kicked occasionally, as if reminding me that someone was still listening. I crossed off the date on the calendar in the hallway. There were no future plans marked, just white boxes and old ink. When you're gone from their world long enough, they stop asking why you disappeared. I knew now. I'd have to hold on to this child, even if it meant losing everything else. The dream came again, the one where I held a baby with thick curls and wide, curious eyes. He was warm in my arms, breathing softly against my neck. Then, like fog slipping through fingers, he faded. I woke gasping, one hand instinctively on my belly. The sheets were twisted beneath me, damp with sweat. The silence of the house pressed in like insulation. Thick, suffocating. Derek wasn't home. Again. I didn't bother checking where he was anymore. If I asked, it had just become another argument about how he's not on a leash. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling. "I won't lose you," I whispered, stroking the gentle curve of my stomach. "Not this time." A year ago, things were different. I was different. I had gone to the clinic alone, except technically, Derek had come with me. He stayed in the waiting room with headphones on, scrolling through his phone while I signed the paperwork. My hand trembled holding the pen. I looked up at the nurse, waiting for someone to stop me. No one did. When I stepped out, he barely looked up. "Glad that's done. Now we can focus," he said. I nodded like I agreed. I didn't. He told me we weren't ready, that it was better this way. "You'll thank me one day," he'd said, patting my leg like I was a child who couldn't grasp the bigger picture. But I hadn't thanked him, not once. This pregnancy felt heavier, not because of the baby, but because of what came before. I was 4 months in, and Derek hadn't gone to a single appointment. Every time I asked, he'd mumble something about meetings or being too tired. When the doctor asked during my last checkup if I had support at home, I smiled too fast and said, "Of course. Of course." That night, while folding laundry, I opened the top drawer of my closet. Beneath old scarves and a box of thank you cards, I pulled out a folded piece of tissue paper. Inside was a faded ultrasound photo. The first one. I had kept it, even after everything. I placed it beside the new one I'd gotten at my last visit. Side by side, like shadows of what was and what would be. I didn't know why I framed them. Maybe I needed to see both truths next to each other, the one I was told to forget and the one I was determined to protect. I didn't hang the frame. I slid it under a pile of books in the back of the closet. Safe, but not buried. That was the night I started writing again. I found my old journal shoved behind a stack of tax documents. The cover was worn, edges curled. I flipped past pages filled with hopes and dates and plans from a version of me that still believed in promises. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "I deserve to remember." It felt small and dangerous all at once, but freeing. Later, Derek came home. It was after 10. He didn't say where he'd been, just tossed his keys onto the counter and opened the fridge. "You make anything?" he asked. "There's casserole in the oven," I said, not looking up from the sink. He nodded, pulled it out, and reheated a plate without another word. After a few bites, he glanced at me. "You've been quiet lately?" I smiled. Not wide. Just enough. "Is that a problem?" He snorted. "No, actually, it's kind of nice." He scraped the plate clean and left it in the sink. "I'll be upstairs," he said, "if you're done with your mood." I didn't answer. Back in the bedroom, I tucked my journal under my pillow. The last thing I wrote before turning out the light. I was done forgetting. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the last time I cried over him. 1 week passed. The air in the house had shifted. Everything felt drier, sharper. Even the walls seemed to echo differently. I was 5 months along now, belly firm and forward, making it impossible to hide the truth from myself. I was carrying this child into a house that no longer felt like home. My OB/GYN appointment was at 10 a.m., and I didn't bother asking Derek to come. He hadn't been to the last 3. I drove myself, parked at the far end of the lot, and sat in the car until the air conditioner stopped pushing cool air. When I checked in, the nurse smiled like she always did. "Dad running late?" she asked cheerfully. I gave a practiced smile, one I'd perfected for strangers. "You know how work is," I said. In the room, the doctor measured my belly, listened to the heartbeat, strong and steady. Then she glanced at the screen, then at me. "Everything looks good," she said gently. "Are you feeling safe and supported at home?" The question landed between us like a dropped plate. I nodded too fast. "That's good to hear," she said. But I knew she didn't believe me. I didn't either. That night, dinner was awkward. I made pasta. He didn't thank me, just stirred it around the plate like he was poking through trash. "Kid kicked all night again," Derek said without looking up. "You toss like you're in a storm." "I can't control that," I said, trying not to sound defensive. He scraped his fork against the plate, loud and deliberate. "Maybe you should start sleeping downstairs. Just for a while, you know, so we both get some rest." "Downstairs," I repeated. I already knew what he meant. The garage guest space, the one we used for old furniture and off-season clothes. "It's not a big deal," he said, shrugging. "Just until the baby's born. We both need sleep, right?" I didn't answer. I wasn't going to argue over what I already knew was a demand disguised as a suggestion. Later, I found my pillow and blanket folded neatly at the top of the garage stairs. No note. No conversation. Just expectation. I stood there staring at them, heart tight in my chest. Then I picked them up and carried them down the steps. The space was cold. Dust clung to the corners, and the air had the faint smell of old paint and forgotten projects. I made up the futon, laid the pillow down, sat on the edge, and stared at the far wall. I didn't know which ached more, my lower back or the hollow space where respect used to live. That night, I pulled out a notepad and tried to write a letter to the baby. I got as far as "You are wanted." That was it. The tears came fast, flooding my cheeks, catching on my collarbone. In the silence that followed, the garage door creaked. Then, slam. He hadn't even checked on me. I pressed both hands to my belly and closed my eyes. "You're staying," I whispered. "He can leave." I didn't know it yet, but the second envelope would change everything. 3 mornings had passed since the garage became my bedroom. I moved slower now, not just from the weight I carried, but from the air in this house. It was thick with the kind of silence that could slice skin. I tried to move through it unnoticed, but even quiet was never quiet enough for Derek. I was reaching for a coffee mug, the chipped one I always used, when it slipped. It hit the floor and shattered, ceramic pieces skidding under the cabinet. I flinched at the sound, but said nothing. Derek stormed in before I could even bend down. "Unbelievable," he snapped. "You break more than you fix, Arties." "I dropped a cup," I said calmly. He didn't respond, just turned and slammed the pantry door so hard a plate vibrated off the dish rack and shattered too. I stood still, barefoot in the wreckage. He stared at me like he was waiting for an apology. I gave him none. His anger used to frighten me. Now it just looked small. After he left, I swept everything up and took the trash out. The sun was climbing, heating the concrete. I stood in the driveway longer than I needed to, letting the warmth remind me I was still in control of my own 2 feet. Back inside the garage, I folded laundry on a crate I'd turned into a makeshift table. Each piece of clothing was another tiny task that let me pretend things were normal. Isaac kicked lightly against my ribs. I ran a hand over my stomach. "You're going to love sunlight," I whispered. "We'll find it again." Upstairs, Derek's voice echoed through the floorboards. He was laughing on a call. The contrast was jarring. I imagined what his voice must sound like to the person on the other end. Warm, charming, like he hadn't banished his pregnant wife to the basement. Around lunchtime, I checked the mail. Tucked between coupons and an electricity bill was a plain white envelope. No return address, no markings, just my name. Inside was a business card. Trina Monroe, family law attorney. No note, no explanation. But I didn't need one. I stared at that card for a long time, then slipped it between the pages of my prenatal journal, the one I only wrote in when Derek was gone. It stayed there like a quiet promise I wasn't ready to speak out loud. That evening, Derek came home to a reheated casserole. He walked into the garage without knocking, holding the plate like a peace offering, but delivering it like a lecture. "This is cold," he muttered. "It's warm," I replied. "If you want it hotter, you know where the microwave is." He looked at me like he hadn't heard me correctly. I looked right back, not blinking, not backing down. He said nothing, just turned and walked out. Later that night, I sat on the futon in the dark, my phone screen glowing. I didn't feel like writing, so I opened the voice recorder. I used to think he was the one changing, but I'm the one who stopped shrinking. The next morning, I checked the mailbox again. There was another plain envelope. Inside, a USB stick. No label, no instructions, just potential. The cramp hit so hard it folded me in half. I clutched the edge of the futon and sucked in air through clenched teeth. It was just after 2 a.m. I'd been dreaming about a beach, sunlight, waves, soft sand, and then pain pulled me awake like a rip current. I sat up, breathing slowly, praying it was false labor. Maybe Braxton Hicks, maybe stress. Another tightening, sharper, closer. I waited 10 minutes, then 5. It didn't stop. I pulled on a hoodie over my nightgown and started up the stairs. One hand on the railing, the other on my belly. Each step was an effort. The air felt too thick, my feet too heavy. I made it to the landing and leaned against the wall outside Derek's room. Knocked once, then again, harder. "Derek," I said, loud enough to wake him, but not enough to panic him. "I need help, please." Nothing. I pounded this time. The door opened a crack. His eyes squinted against the hallway light, his hair sticking up in uneven clumps. "What the hell?" he muttered. "I think I'm in labor," I said. "Early. I need to go in. Can you—" He cut me off with a scoff. "It's always something with you." "I'm bleeding." "You're being dramatic again. Go lay down. You'll be fine." "I can't even stand straight." My voice cracked. "I need to go. I need you to drive me, please." He looked past me like he wasn't even listening. Then, with a low grunt, he pushed the door wider and shoved my shoulder. It wasn't hard, but it didn't have to be. I lost my balance, and my body twisted. My foot missed the next step. I fell sideways, grabbing at air, at walls, at anything. But nothing caught me. I hit the steps with my hip, then my elbow, then rolled. Not far, just a few stairs. But enough. Enough to steal my breath. Enough to make me scream. He didn't run down. He didn't even check. The door shut. For a minute, all I could do was breathe shallow and stare at the ceiling. The hallway light above cast a yellow halo around the stairwell. I crawled to the bottom, hands shaking, belly tight. My phone was in the garage. I pulled myself through the door, dragged the blanket off the futon, and reached for my phone under the pillow. 911, I whispered when the operator answered. "I'm 36 weeks, bleeding, fell, alone." The woman on the other end stayed calm. "Can you unlock your front door?" I told her yes. I told her the address. And then I dropped the phone. The sirens came fast, maybe 10 minutes. I don't remember all of it, just fragments. The front door creaking, gloved hands lifting me, a flashlight passing over my eyes. Then a whisper near my ear, soft, female, kind. "You're safe now." I think I cried. I think I passed out. At some point, I was in the back of the ambulance. There was movement, beeping, questions, a clip on my finger. I remember grabbing the paramedic's wrist and asking, "Is the baby okay?" "We'll know soon," he said. "Hang in there." I turned my head toward the window. The garage light was still on, but nobody stood in the doorway. Nobody came running. I closed my eyes and wrapped both arms around my belly. "Never again," I whispered. I wasn't going to wait for justice. I was going to file it myself. They kept the lights low in the recovery room, but even in the dimness, everything felt harsh. The beeping monitors, the click of nurse shoes on linoleum, the soft cries from the NICU down the hall, all of it cut through the fog in my head like jagged glass. I opened my eyes to an empty chair beside my bed. No flowers, no cards, no husband. The nurse came in, adjusting my IV, smiling gently. "Your baby's stable, tiny but strong. NICU team's happy with his breathing." I nodded, throat too dry to speak. She set a manila folder on the tray beside me. "A woman named Trina dropped this off. Said you'd know her?" My hands trembled as I reached for it. Inside were printed pamphlets on emergency custody, asset protection, and something labeled exit strategy. Tucked between the pages was a bright pink sticky note. "You're not alone." Below that, a USB drive and a color screenshot from what looked like security footage. I stared hard, my heart pounding as I realized what I was looking at. Me, clutching my belly on the stairs. Derek's hand on my shoulder. The moment of the push. He looked right at the camera after it happened, and walked away. My hands shook as I turned the page. Later that night, with the glow of the hospital tablet on my lap, I logged into our bank account. It didn't take long to spot what Trina had already flagged. 5 large transfers, none of them to accounts I recognized. All of them dated the same week I entered my 3rd trimester. Each one marked with some vague memo: consulting fee, shared venture, client retainer. All lies. All signed in his name. I opened a note on the tablet and started logging every detail. Date, time, amount, screenshot, save, repeat. The next morning, a new text appeared on my phone. Derek, let me know when you're discharged. We need to talk logistics. No, how are you? No, is the baby okay? No apology, just logistics. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed, me. You can speak to my lawyer. I hit send before I could second guess it. The word lawyer sat heavy on my tongue, like something sacred. That afternoon, I asked a nurse for paperwork to block Derek from my medical information. HIPAA allowed it. He'd have no access, no updates, no visitation rights. It was a small act, but the first I'd made in weeks that felt like it belonged to me. After dinner, I asked for privacy and propped my phone against the IV pole. The camera shook slightly as I pressed record. My name is Artis. I was pushed down a stairwell by my husband while pregnant. I called 911 myself. I delivered my son alone. This, I held up the hospital bracelet, is what I'm holding on to now. My voice didn't tremble. You tried to erase me, but I'm recording this so no one else can. I saved the video, stored it in 3 separate cloud drives. That evening, I reached into the folder again and plugged in the USB. The screen filled with files, spreadsheets, transaction records, names I didn't recognize. But one folder stood out. It was labeled with my name. Inside, financial statements I'd never seen. Notes on real estate I didn't know we owned. A document showing he'd tried to name someone else as beneficiary on our life insurance policy. I leaned back against the pillow and whispered aloud, "You played with fire." My eyes drifted to the bassinet photo the nurse had given me. The little hat, the tiny feet. Now you get the flame. Now that I'd torn off the mask, he would try everything to put it back on. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not the temperature, but the energy. Clinical, calculated. Trina walked beside me, her presence steady and unbothered. She didn't say much as we entered, just gave me a nod before straightening the stack of documents in her hand. Derek was already there, flanked by his lawyer, sitting like a man who believed the room belonged to him. His smile was just wide enough to feel smug, just shallow enough to feel rehearsed. He stood as we approached and offered a manila folder. "Just want to avoid drama," he said softly, handing it to me. "This is fair, it's clean. We can both walk away." Inside was a drafted separation agreement. Assets split in his favor, full parental influence under the guise of stability. Vague language that gave him the house, the car, and the control. Trina didn't flinch. She pulled out a USB drive from her leather portfolio and slid it across the table. "No need," she said. "We brought our own outline." What followed felt like the unraveling of a thread he thought would never be pulled. One by one, Trina laid it out. Screenshots of text messages laced with veiled threats. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers to third-party accounts. The security footage, still image in motion, of the night on the stairs. When the clip played in the courtroom, it was silent except for the soft hum of the monitor. The image was clear. Derek's hand on my shoulder, my body tipping, his indifference as he turned away. The court clerk stiffened. Derek's lawyer leaned back, visibly rattled. Derek spoke for the first time since Trina had started. "She's exaggerating. Emotional people do that." The judge leaned forward. "Being assaulted while in labor is not a feeling. It's a fact." By the time the session ended, Derek's access to joint finances had been frozen. Visitation was suspended pending investigation. Trina folded her folder with methodical grace. As we exited, Cameras flashed outside. Reporters called my name, but I kept walking. Halfway down the courthouse steps, I saw his parents off to the side. Lois wouldn't meet my gaze. His father looked like he wanted to, but neither moved toward me. Just before we reached the curb, a woman stepped from the crowd and leaned in. "Good for you," she whispered, then disappeared. Later that evening, I returned to the hospital. The NICU smelled like antiseptic and lavender from the nurse's hand lotion. My son was swaddled in blue, skin still pink and new. A nurse glanced up and smiled. "Your boy is strong," she said, "just like his mama." I touched the incubator gently, the only sound between us my quiet crying. That night, Trina drove me to the apartment she'd arranged. A temporary place, but clean. Safe. Waiting. She handed me the keys and smiled. "Welcome home," she said. Inside, a small bouquet of daisies sat on the table with a note in her handwriting. "You did it. Rest now. More to come." I set my bag down and leaned against the doorframe. For the first time in what felt like forever, I closed a door and locked it without fear. Then I exhaled. Long, deep, final. The next fight wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding what he tried to destroy. The safe house held its own kind of silence. It wasn't cold like the one I'd lived in before. No slammed cabinets, no footsteps that made me brace my body. Just the steady rhythm of my son's breathing and the occasional creak of the old building settling into the night. Isaac stirred beside me, a tiny fist curling against his cheek. I watched his chest rise and fall, then leaned back against the worn armchair and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. Every time I drifted off, I saw courtrooms, flashes of screens, Derek's voice in that smug tone he always used when he thought he had the upper hand. I sat up when my phone buzzed. A message from Trina. "Trina, court has frozen his assets. Next hearing, temp custody plus support." I read it twice. I should have smiled, but I didn't. I just exhaled. None of this felt like winning. It felt like cleaning up after a fire. Necessary, but not satisfying. Later that day, an email came through from Derek's attorney. Subject: seeking mutual cooperation. Polite legal speak, phrases like co-parenting pathway and restoring civility. I scrolled down, skimmed the attached draft settlement. It was trash. A few hours after that, Derek sent a text directly. "Derek, do you still want to ruin my life, Arties? I was never the monster you painted me to be." I didn't reply. I blocked the number. Again. That evening, I pulled out the USB Trina gave back to me, the one I'd almost forgotten about in the shuffle. I plugged it into my borrowed laptop, not sure what I was looking for. I clicked through old folders, old screenshots, bank statements. My fingers stopped when I saw the audio file. Voice note 4.mp3, I clicked. His voice poured out, lazy and confident, like he was on the phone with someone he trusted too much. "She's just an ATM with a womb, useful for now, but not forever." I sat frozen. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even hurt. It was something more final than both. I opened a new email to Trina and typed 2 words in the subject line. "Use this." That night, I sat on the floor beside Isaac's bassinet, head resting on my knees. The weight of exhaustion, grief, and delayed rage pressed down all at once. I felt my chest tighten like it had back in the stairwell, but this time there was no fall. Just me, still breathing. A soft coo pulled me out of the spiral. I looked up. Isaac blinked at me through sleepy eyes, his mouth making tiny movements. I lifted him, pressed him to my shoulder, and stood slowly, rocking side to side. "I got you," I whispered, "and you got me." In the morning, I printed my personal statement for the court hearing. I'd reworked it 3 times already, but this version felt different. It was firm, not defensive, not bitter, just true. I read it aloud once in the kitchen, then folded the pages neatly and placed them into a new file with my name typed clearly across the front. It wasn't just about him anymore, or even me. It was about clarity, about refusing to let someone else write the version of my life they found convenient. This isn't over, but I'm not afraid of him anymore. I'd learned how to endure, but now I was learning how to lead. The morning of the final court hearing, I stood outside the courthouse with Trina. She checked her watch and offered me a brief smile, but said nothing. The kind of silence that didn't press or pry, just held space. Reporters lingered near the entrance, cameras slung over shoulders, eyes flicking from clipboards to faces. I adjusted Isaac's photo tucked in my purse. It wasn't courage I carried that day. It was certainty. Derek arrived 10 minutes late, alone. He looked thinner, suit wrinkled, jaw clenched. His eyes scanned the crowd but landed nowhere. The smirk he'd worn weeks ago was gone. What replaced it was unfamiliar. Not exactly remorse, but the realization that people no longer whispered behind his back. They stared straight through him. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low conversation. The judge entered. Everyone stood. What followed was methodical. The judge's voice steady as she read through the final rulings. Asset freeze. Permanent. Custody. Suspended pending full evaluation. Derek's attempt at shifting blame? Erased by one recorded voicemail, played aloud for the room to hear. She's just an ATM with a womb. Useful for now, but not forever. A few people in the gallery audibly reacted. Derek tried to interject. Mr. Holloway, sit down, the judge said firmly, without raising her voice. Lois stood then. Her hair was perfectly set, hands clutched around her purse. This isn't fair, she began. Artis has always twisted things. My son is not. Trina didn't even glance up as she handed the judge another file. Inside were printouts of Lois's church group messages. Comments she'd posted under prayer chains. One called me difficult. Another implied the baby might not even be Derek's. The judge took a moment, then nodded. Community pressure can reinforce the cycles we're here to break. Noted for the record. Lois sank back into her seat. She didn't speak again. By the time we stepped outside, the story had already hit 2 news feeds. Texas mom fights back after labor assault. I saw the headline on a reporter's tablet as we passed. Derek stood in the distance, hands shoved into his pockets. No one approached him. Back at the safe house, I folded Isaac's laundry on the kitchen table. No garage, no echoing insults, just quiet punctuated by his soft breathing. I picked up a onesie with tiny stars printed on the sleeves, folded it neatly, laid it beside the rest. Across the room, the mirror above the hallway shelf caught my reflection. I didn't recognize her, and I didn't want to, because this version of me didn't flinch when the mail came, didn't second-guess her instincts, didn't try to explain away cruelty in the name of compromise. This version of me smiled softly at her own strength. Later that evening, Trina handed me a motion for permanent custody. You ready? She asked. I signed it without hesitation. She glanced down at the signature and said, You're not just surviving anymore, you're setting precedent. I looked her in the eye. I don't just want peace, I said. I want protection, for every woman like me. Closure doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives in silence. Morning sunlight spilled across the crib like warm honey. Isaac's chest rose and fell with the rhythm of peace, a rhythm I was still learning to trust. The walls of the safe house didn't creak like our old place. No voices barked from upstairs, no footsteps tracked across my ceiling, just the hum of my own breath and his. Trina's text came just after 9 a.m. Trina, all filings are done. You're free, legally and emotionally. I stared at the screen, expecting tears or some kind of shaking, but all I felt was stillness, solid, like exhaling after holding your breath for months. Later that day, while sorting through a shoebox of old papers, I found it. The unsent email. The one I had typed in a gasping rage, then saved and buried like a wound I couldn't touch. The subject line still read, "I don't know what else to do." I clicked it open, scrolled slowly. Paragraphs filled with panic, begging, confusion. The version of me who'd written it had been desperate for help. Any help. I read it out loud in the kitchen, my voice now steady. Not to relive it, but to honor her. Then I copied it, pasted it into a new message, and sent it anonymously to an online support group I'd recently found. Not for pity, but because someone, somewhere, might be exactly where I'd been. That afternoon, I walked to a cafe a few blocks from the house. Just me, no stroller. I needed 1 hour where I wasn't holding or feeding or folding, just breathing. I had just finished stirring sugar into my tea when I looked up. And there she was. Lois. Her hair was neat but flat. Her eyes tired. She spotted me and paused, then walked over, careful, like I might shatter on contact. "I didn't know he'd go that far," she said. I didn't answer. She gestured toward the empty chair across from me. "Can I?" "No." I stood, wrapped my scarf around my neck slowly, deliberately. I left my tea half-finished. As I passed her, I paused just long enough to say, "But you never asked." Back at the house, Trina met me at the gate with a thick envelope. Custody papers, finalized, court-stamped, and sealed. She handed them over like a trophy. "You've done more than most women even believe they can," she said. "You didn't just break out, you made a path." Then she smiled in that way only someone who's been on both sides of pain can smile. There's a mentorship circle forming. Survivors who want to be more than survivors. I think you belong in it. That night, I pulled out my old journal. The same one I'd once hid under the futon in the garage. I flipped back through its pages, smudged ink, tear stains, pieces of me I barely recognized. At the very end, I added a new line. "This is the version of me that lived." Around midnight, the phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it, let it ring 4 times, then 5. I didn't answer. I blocked the number without hesitation. No anger, no drama, just a breath and a button. Not anymore. Not every ending needs a roar. Sometimes the whisper is what wins. The apartment smelled like peace, warm laundry, a faint trace of cinnamon from the candle burning on the windowsill. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, still hot, watching the light spill gently across Isaac's crib. He slept with his arms splayed like a starfish, mouth parted slightly. No one stomped overhead. No voices cut the silence like razors. Just stillness. For the first time in years, stillness didn't scare me. I whispered aloud, "I don't flinch at quiet anymore." Later that morning, I folded a manila envelope and slipped it into my tote. Final paperwork, just one signature left to complete. Trina had offered to file it for me, but I'd declined. When I walked into the courthouse, the clerk looked up and said, "You could have mailed it." I smiled. "I needed to hand it in. Some doors I need to close myself." She nodded and stamped the file. The thud echoed louder than expected, and that was it. Done. That afternoon, I met the women's group at the community center. Trina had introduced me weeks ago, but this was my first time speaking. I listened to a woman named Celia talk about her first night alone in a shelter. Another, Rebecca, described hiding her bruises under scarves in summer. When they turned to me, I hesitated, then opened my mouth. "I used to think surviving was enough," I said, "but healing is louder, it ripples further." No applause followed, just a quiet that meant they heard me. Celia squeezed my hand as we passed in the hallway. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The next morning, I took Isaac for a walk. The weather had finally tipped into spring. Trees bloomed pale green. I pushed the stroller slowly, letting the breeze kiss his cheeks. Ahead, a man shouted into his phone, pacing, aggressive. Months ago, that sound would have made me tense, would have sent my mind spinning back into defense mode. But this time, I kept walking. Not faster, not slower, just steady. I lived through the storm. I don't chase clouds. Back home, while Isaac napped, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a pen. I wrote a letter. Not for the courts. Not for Derek. For Isaac. You were born in chaos, but you'll grow in calm. I fought not just for us, but for the woman I became through you. You reminded me that being strong doesn't mean being silent. I folded the letter carefully and slid it behind a photo of us, him in my arms, both of us smiling, bathed in sunlight. I tucked it inside a book on the shelf. Around dusk, my phone lit up with a blocked number. I stared at it. Let it ring. I didn't pick up. Didn't wonder who it was. Didn't care. Instead, I opened my cloud folder and deleted the last picture I had of Derek. One taken on our honeymoon, when I still believed his lies had charm. Gone. You don't need to be remembered to be forgiven, I said quietly. Isaac stirred in his sleep. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. And just like that, I was free. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you. Not just for listening, but for holding space for a voice that was once nearly silenced. I never imagined I'd be someone who had to claw her way out of a life that looked perfect from the outside. But the truth is, many of us are living lives like that. Quiet battles behind closed doors, smiles that hide survival. What I learned is this. Healing doesn't look like justice in a courtroom or a dramatic ending. Healing is peace at the breakfast table. It's learning to sleep through the night. It's choosing yourself without explanation. It's knowing that silence can hurt, but it can also be power when you use it to walk away. If you're watching this and wondering whether it's too late to take back your story, it's not. Whether you're still in it, just stepped out, or years removed, your voice still matters. Your peace still matters. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you know ever had to reclaim your life piece by piece? What helped you most during that time? Leave a comment below. Drop a 1 if this story spoke to you. Or just tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to connect. If you didn't resonate with this story, that's okay too. Let me know what didn't land for you. Every perspective matters here. And if you want to be part of a space where stories like this get told, raw, real, and healing, please subscribe to this channel. More stories are on the way, and I hope you'll be here for the next one.